Good afternoon, everyone. Committee on Science, Space, and Technology have come to order. Pursuant to notice, the Committee on Science, Space, Technology meets to formally organize for the 112th Congress. We'll wait as you folks file in. They're welcome to come on in as they want to. Hey, come in. And today, as previously noticed, we intend to accomplish the following. First, adoption of the committee rules for the 112th Congress, ratification of subcommittee chairs, subcommittee ranking members, and subcommittee membership, adoption of the committee oversight plan for the 112th Congress. As is tradition on the committee, I ask unanimous consent for the authority to recess the committee at any point during consideration of these matters. We may have votes in a while, and we'll recess for a while and set the agreed amount of time that we can wait to come back, but we do want you to come back. That's to postpone further proceedings when a record vote's ordered on the question of approving a measure or matter or on adopting an amendment, and without objection, I want to so order. I'd like to recognize myself for some opening remarks. I'd like to, of course, welcome everyone here today for the organizational meeting of the Committee on Science, Space, Technology for the 112th Congress. This committee was permanently established in 1959 as the Committee on Science and Astronautics in response to Sputnik. And I remember Sputnik. I'm sure some of you weren't. Eddie Bernice wasn't even born when they had Sputnik there. But I remember seeing it go over and watching it and waving to them. And while its jurisdiction of the committee has grown over the years, space exploration has always been retained as a central part of the mission. As such, I felt like it was appropriate to return to the name of the committee to Science, Space, and Technology. And with the help of folks on our staff, we got the space part put in there, and I think it should be, because I've always feared that if we're going to move space to transportation or somewhere where it didn't belong, but it belongs right here, and we're going to have to really work hard and work together to make something happen there. As we organize today, we're mindful not only of the many new faces that are joining this committee, but also the fact that our esteemed colleague, Gabrielle Giffords, cannot be with us today due to the tragic events that you're all familiar with. Our hearts go out to the people killed and injured in the Tucson incident, including members of Gabby's staff. I had an opportunity to meet several members of her district staff when I, along with Katie Crooks and Leslie Gilbert, attended a field hearing that she hosted on solar energy several years ago, one of her very first. And she was standing there just like she was when a wild, crazy person stepped in and murdered a little girl and a lot of other people. They're all dedicated, and all her staff were a pleasure to work with. We're looking for her to be back. And I know you join me in wishing her a rapid recovery and quick return to this committee. The 10 chairmen before me established a lasting legacy of bipartisanship and thoughtful decision-making. We just had several years with Bart Garden, who's as fair a guy as I've ever known, and other than thinking that I ought to be chairman, why, he probably is as good or better than I'd ever hoped to be. And he was very fair and a friend. It's my hope that we can continue in that vein this Congress as we tackle some of our nation's most challenging problems, whether the issue is energy security, technological innovation, preeminence in space, or advancements in science, technology, engineering, and math, education. This committee has always looked to the future in hopes of supporting a more competitive nation. Today, as many Americans are concerned and worried that our future is not going to be as bright as our past, given that our nation is mired in debt and that entrepreneurs are overburdened with federal regulations and taxes, I share many of their concerns, but I'm also convinced that we can turn things around and reinvigorate our economy. Smart investments in research and development, coupled with proper business and tax incentives, can spur innovation and allow American businesses to flourish. Americans have always had the opportunity to turn a good idea into a successful business, and because of this, the U.S. has led the world in innovation. A responsible science and technology policy can help America maintain this leadership, but we have to recognize that increases in federal spending are not the same as prudent investment and do not necessarily lead to innovation. and sometimes they write too much for me to say in these opening statements, so I'm going to skip on down a little. I look, and I appreciate them very much. I look forward to working with all of you as this Congress to find out solutions to problems that are going to move our country forward. And now I'm honored to recognize Mrs. Johnson to present her open remarks, and I'll say a word or so about Eddie Bernice before I do. I was a Democrat many years, had a lot of Democratic friends, and when I switched, she was the very first person to call and say, Mr. Hall, I didn't agree with you switching, but I want you to know that it won't affect our friendship one iota. That's the kind of friend she's been, and I think that's the way we'll work together. Thank you. I recognize you, Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall, and let me associate myself with your remarks about Ms. Gifford. And congratulations to my good friend becoming chairman. Actually, our friendship and acquaintance started before either one of us came to Congress. Mr. Hall from Rockwall, my district is very near, right next to his, and his wife probably reacted more negatively than I did when he switched.
Wasn't any fun eating out and sleeping by myself for about 6 weeks.
Knowing each other so long, I can confidently say that I know you will be a good chairman and a fair chairman, and I look forward to working with you this Congress as we continue the committee's important work in ensuring our nation's competitiveness. As President Obama noted in the State of the Union address, our country is in an epic fight right now to remain competitive in the global economy. This committee has a very important role to play in helping to ensure our competitiveness. Science education and research that leads to new technologies and products are two of the cornerstones of our economic growth and security. Numerous studies have indicated at least half of our economic growth since World War II has been a result of technological development. And so some studies suggest that the percentage is much higher. It is not a coincidence that this period of unprecedented economic growth occurred at a time of increased federal investment in research and development. The National Science Foundation was founded in 1950, NASA was created in 1958, and the Department of Energy was created in 1977. The investment America made in R&D at these and other agencies helped to create the foundation for our economics today. We must remember this history because the research and development investments we make or fail to make today will in large measure determine what jobs are created in the future and whether our economy will be able to compete internationally. It is worth noting that our economic competitors recognize the importance of investment in research and development and STEM education and are pouring their resources into these areas. This is something we must be mindful of as we look for ways to reduce our budget deficit. Otherwise, we are likely to find our country's technological preeminence eclipsed in short order. This has historically been a bipartisan concern, and I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle as we move forward to ensure our nation maintains its competitive economic edge and continue to create good jobs for our citizens in the coming decades. And with that, I again congratulate you, Mr. Hall, and I yield back to balance my time.
I thank you, and we'll begin with the adoption of the proposed committee rules. Copies of the rules are in your folders. I think all of you have them. Copies were previously circulated to each of your offices with an explanatory memo of the changes from the governing the committee during the 111th Congress. In accordance with the new House transparency requirements, the text has been available on our website for the public to review as well. The vast majority of the changes reflect amendments adopted to the House rules on January the 5th that seek to bring more transparency to committee operations. These proposed rules have been reviewed by the House parliamentarian to ensure their conformity with the official rules and practices of the House. With that, now I recognize Mrs. Johnson for 5 minutes for any remarks that you may have.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hall, the proposed rules are very similar to those of the 111th Congress, and I only have a couple of concerns. The subpoena rule has been changed to allow the chair to issue subpoenas without a committee vote during recess of as little as 3 days. While I have some concerns about this, if the chairman would extend the informal arrangement that existed between himself and the previous chair, that he will not issue a recess subpoena under this authority without seeking my agreement, then I think our concerns are laid to rest. I also note that the proposed rules eliminate the requirement that the time of a hearing be included in the hearing notice. I understand that the chair intends to continue the practice of noticing the hearing times with the official hearing notice. And if I am correct in this understanding, then that will alleviate my concerns on this matter.
I was talking when I should have been listening. You had a question. What was it? Okay, yeah. Well, I'd like to highlight and explain some of the certain rules, some of the changes we're having. What are you talking about, Dale? Yeah, I don't have to read that from here. We'll consult. I think the rules require that I consult with you. That's what they required Bart to do, consult with me, and I will consult with you and tell you, and we'll try not to surprise you on anything, but I'll consult with you.
Thank you.
And that's what we have to do. It's what I'm willing to do.
Thank you.
What? And she says to tell you that we'll put the time on all the notices.
Okay.
How's that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think your question shortened my speech considerably. All right. Does anyone else have any comments or any questions on the rules? Mr. Miller?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about the economic disclosure rule. The old rule required a disclosure of any financial interest which are relevant to or subject to the subject of any witness's testimony, including public and private research grants or other economic interest, any kind of compensation from any relevant entity. The new rule only requires disclosure of federal grants or contracts. That seems to be a large omission. The Union of Concerned Scientists and others have contended that almost all of the climate change skeptics, the scientists who have supported their position, who supported that position of questioning climate change or that it's caused by humans, is financed by the oil industry. And have even compared it to the scientists in the 60s and 70s who published research papers questioning the research showing the health effects of tobacco use, which turned out to be entirely financed by the tobacco industry, and in some cases scientists did nothing other than sign their name to research papers that had been written entirely by the tobacco industry. And without that information, we really do not have important information that we ought to be able to take into account when we are trying to decide how much weight to give a witness's testimony, how much credibility to accord them. We might be able to ask questions about it, but we certainly can't ask questions very effectively without that information up front. What is the reasoning behind changing the rule to limit the disclosures so dramatically?
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, recognize Mr. Rohrbach.
In reference to the gentleman's question, because this is other committees face this same type of situation, is not the minority or just any of us free to ask any witness exactly what his financial background is, requiring a financial statement before someone can actually testify could be problematic, but certainly that doesn't deny any member the right to ask a person under oath whether or not he has any financial ties to various industries.
Well, and there goes your 5 minutes. If you had that information beforehand, you might be able to ask with more particularity, much more precisely what a witness's economic interests really are, what kind of research they did, and on and on. And we will be completely flying blind without that information disclosed
Actually,
in
you're
advance
not. Go ahead.
for all of us to take into account and perhaps ask questions about.
Actually, you're not flying blind unless you want to be blind. This rule has been modified to make it consistent with the House rules, and it'll require non-governmental witnesses to provide a financial disclosure with the information specified in the House rules, and will require the committee to make such disclosures publicly available with appropriate blackouts to protect the privacy of the witness. That's the most we do for them. The House rule has not been modified in content from the previous Congress. However, the House rules for the 112th Congress altered the rule to require that all financial disclosures will now be publicly available in electronic form. This change is intended to ensure transparency, and although the committee does plan to eliminate certain information, witnesses may still have a concern about the public access to the disclosing of such information. During each of the prior two Congresses, the committee rules required any witness, whether testifying in a governmental or non-governmental capacity, to include a much more expansive and detailed list of financial holdings versus that content required to fulfill the House rule. Much more. The additional information was not required under the House rules and was met with some resistance from witnesses, but was often complied with after an assurance that the information would not be made publicly available. This information was, under a policy established by the committee, often only seen by the chairman and ranking member out of a concern for the witness's financial privacy. Because the House rules now require that financial disclosures be made publicly available in electronic form, a determination was made to simply mirror the House rule with the committee rules. It's intended to provide a basic and a balance between the requirement for disclosure and a comfort level for those testifying in front of the committee that their privacy will be protected. Witnesses will be reticent to testify knowing detailed financial information has to be provided and must be made publicly available. So in an effort to maintain transparency in the area, the committee expects to craft a policy that will ask witnesses to disclose financial information in addition to federal grants and contracts that may be relevant to topic upon which the witness is testifying. Well, I think if that's the question you're asking, is that going to happen? Yes. The majority and minority may be able to come to an agreement on the additional contents of the witness disclosure form. I'm willing to try to do that.
I'm still not quite clear, Mr. Chairman, exactly what will be provided, when it will be provided, and in what manner we can use it. If a witness is testifying and they have received substantial funding from businesses that seem to have an interest in the topic of their testimony, it seems like not only should we be entitled to it, the American people should be entitled to it, and we certainly should be entitled to it in a way that allows us to ask questions about their financial interest to determine whether it affects their credibility or whether we should take it into account in deciding how much weight to give their testimony. What is going to be available, and how is it going to be available?
Well, we'll be willing to talk that out with you. We want the privacy to be protected in order not to discourage those that we ask to testify before us, and we're going to have further arguments today about subpoenas and time for subpoenas when sometimes we have to make them come to answer. I think we need to cover that, and I'm willing to sit down with you and discuss that, and with the minority leader.
It will be an issue that comes up repeatedly with respect to every hearing.
I'm not sure that I can satisfy your concerns. I'm not sure I can make you understand what I'm saying, but before we meet again, I'll sit with you and see if we can't work that out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any more questions on this?
Is there any more questions, any more discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Recognize, gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I share Mr. Miller's concern, but just so I'm clear, I think I heard you say that, one, on the issue of the time of hearings, that we will have the time on the hearing notice, and that you'll work with the ranking member of the committee on that issue. Also, that you'll work with her on the issue of issuing subpoenas, as we had an agreement. The rule stated one thing, but you and Chairman Gordon in the last Congress worked out an agreement and a procedure which followed normal order. And number three is on Mr. Miller's question. I do share his same concern, but I'm assuming from what I heard you say is that you're willing to sit down with the ranking member to work something out.
Yeah, I will notify her. I will advise her. And that's the same provision that we had with Chairman Gordon.
Well, you had a good,
Anything that came up, he notified me, and I had plenty of time to make an announcement. We may have some arguments about 7 days or 3 days, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
I thank you.
If there's no further discussion.
So if anyone else seeks to be heard, if there's no further discussion, I ask unanimous consent that the rules be considered as read and open to amendment at any point, and that the members proceed with the amendments in the order of the roster.
There aren't any amendments. Are there any amendments?
So I guess my question is, are there any other amendments to the rules? I don't think any have been filed as required by the rules. So if none, the question is on the adoption of the committee rules as proposed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the committee rules are adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. All right. Now then, we now should proceed with the designation of the full committee vice chairman. This designation of the committee vice chairs will be accomplished at a later date. Is the chairman, the appointee here? Mr. Sensenbrenner's on the floor. Okay. So
Just this one.
Rule 1F of the committee rules, as just adopted, provides that the committee chairman designate a member of the majority party to serve as vice chairman of the committee. Pursuant to the rule, I'm pleased to designate, as previously announced, the Honorable Jim Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin as vice chairman of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And you have before you the rosters that are establishing the ratios, subcommittee chairs, and Republican membership has been sent to you of each subcommittee. By order of the Republican caucus of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, I ask unanimous consent that the committee ratify these rosters without and is there objection? If no objection, it's so ordered. I now recognize Mrs. Johnson to offer a similar motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to the instruction of the Democratic caucus, I move that the Democratic rosters found before the members be approved by the committee.
Without objection, it's so ordered. At this time, I'd like to introduce the new Republican members of the committee. On this side of the aisle, we welcome 11 freshmen to the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I first am proud to put a lady first, Sandy Adams of Florida, whose district encumbers and includes Kennedy Space Center. You don't have to hold up your hand, Sandy. We know. Benjamin Quayle of Arizona. Ben will be chairing the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee. Hold your hand up, Ben, where the people can see. And Chuck Fleischman of Tennessee. I never saw anybody from Tennessee I didn't like, and I always told Bart that. And I told him if it weren't for Tennesseans, there wouldn't be a Texas. And he said, well, there wouldn't have been a Texas anyway if the Alamo had a back door. I didn't like that. Scott Ridgell of Virginia, a longtime resident of Kennedy Space Center area. His father worked on Apollo. He's drenched in space. Hold your hand up, please. Steve Palazzo of Mississippi. Steve will be chairing the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. Mo Brooks of Alabama. Mo will be chairing the Research and Science Education Subcommittee. Andy Harris of Maryland. Andy will be chairing the Energy and Environmental Subcommittee. Hold your hands up where I'll know you. See which ones you are. Thank you. Randy Hultgren of Illinois. Chip Kravac of Minnesota. Larry Buchan of Indiana, Dan Benachak of Michigan. And I now recognize Mrs. Johnson to introduce the new Democratic members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to enthusiastically introduce the new Democratic members of the committee. First, let me say I'm pleased to welcome back Zoe Lofgren and Jerry McNerney from California, both hail from the area of Silicon Valley, and we are glad to have them back. I also like to welcome John Sarbanes of Maryland, who, although not a freshman member, is a new member to the committee. And finally, we welcome 3 freshman members of the committee: Terry Sewell from Alabama, Frederica Wilson from Florida, Hanson Clark from Michigan. I'm confident that these members will be very valuable contributors to the committee, and I look forward to working with them this Congress.
Okay, the next item for consideration is the proposed committee oversight plan. Copy is in your folders. Like the committee rules, this document was circulated to members and made available to the public on our website. Under House rules, the committee has to meet in open session and adopt the plan before February 15th. Once adopted, this plan is to be submitted simultaneously to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform and the Committee on House Administration. The plan is very similar to the oversight plans previously submitted by this committee. Lays out a broad set of topics that could potentially be addressed, but also leaves room for the committee to take up unforeseen topics that might arise. The committee takes its oversight charge very seriously and will work with all members to ensure that our government's responsive, efficient, and effective, we hope. Rooting out waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement should not be a partisan affair, so I look forward to working with all my colleagues to implement this plan. And I ask unanimous consent that the proposed committee oversight plan be considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and members proceed with any amendments in the order of the roster. Hearing no objections, it's so ordered. Is there any discussion on the oversight plan? It's in your packet. If there's no further discussion, are there any amendments to the committee oversight plan? Hearing none, the questions on the adoption of committee oversight plan is proposed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. It is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to consider is laid on the table. Now, a couple of housekeeping items. First, without objection, the committee staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the rules, rosters, and oversight plan adopted by the committee for the duration of the 112th Congress. That's to fix typos and things that come up. If there's no objection, it's approved. Second, I'd like to set forth a couple of policies that the committee will observe this Congress. During the 111th Congress, my Republican colleagues routinely offered amendments to legislation seeking to eliminate undefined authorization amounts or time periods. And be a little more definite on that. The committee will no longer consider bills that authorize, quote, such sums as may be necessary, unquote. Further, every program authorized or reauthorized by this committee will have a sunset of not later than 7 years after the first fiscal year spending is authorized or provided. We'll work with all members to implement these policies. And a final note on commemorative bills, the resolutions. As you're all aware, a bulk of these measures will no longer be scheduled for consideration under suspension of the rules. Members are free to introduce and discuss these types of commemorative pieces of legislation during 1-minute speeches or special orders. However, such legislation may only be considered in the House under unanimous consent. So, before I close, I want to give everyone a preview of what the committee will be doing in the coming weeks. As many of you know, the President's FY 2012 budget request will come out Monday. We'll have the President's Science Advisor, John Holdren, before the committee, I think a week from today, is that right? Mm-hmm. To discuss the President's science and technology priorities across the federal government. In March, we'll examine more closely on the President's budget request when we examine the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Department of Energy more closely with Administrators Charlie Bolden and Stephen Chu. Additionally, we'll have a Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee hearing next Wednesday to examine the science and technology programs at the Federal Aviation Administration, including the Next Generation Air Traffic Management System. As Congress moves to reauthorize FAA, we want to make sure that the programs within our jurisdiction are beneficial in meeting the growing needs of our nation. Our committee has already begun hosting a number of briefings with agency officials and will continue to do so in the coming weeks, aimed at assisting your offices get up to speed on various programs. I'd encourage your staff to attend. As you may know, the Space Shuttle is scheduled to launch on the 24th of this month. A lot of you, several of you on both sides, have expressed an interest in doing a congressional delegation trip to the launch, doing a CODEL. I'm certainly willing to undertake such a CODEL if we have enough interest. If y'all really want to, let us know. Please let us know by Monday if you can, if you have an interest in traveling to the launch, and we'll be able to provide more details. I think we can get an airplane to go down there and to come back. Once again, welcome all of you to the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I look forward to working with you, all of you on this Congress. And I want to recognize Mrs. Johnson if she has any other statements or questions that she wants to ask. Otherwise, we're well on the road to adjourning this, our first void of any fisticuffs or argument or anything. We made it through the first one, Eddie.
Yeah.
I hope we have a lot of good ones in front of us.
Thank you very much. Let me say about the launch. I'm unable to travel this time because I was previously scheduled. However, that doesn't mean I won't be there when this launch takes place. I just want everybody to know that they are frequently scheduled and changed because of weather. So don't go and be disappointed if you go down and it doesn't take off. I've done that. Thank you.
Well, it'd be nice if we can go, and we go and come. And I guess you got to call my staff or anybody, and we can tell you all we know about it. But we need to know as soon as we can where we can get proper transportation for everybody that wants to go. We want to go, and yes, it's an exciting thing. I had to know when the first one went up, an old lady across the street from me said, "It'll never go up." And when it went up, she said, "It'll never come down." But we've had a great time. We have a lot of hard work. We've noticed the cuts already that have been made in our program, the NASA program. We need to work together. My goal is to keep our position in space and keep our leadership in space, to keep our national, international partners, and to keep our word with them. I'm not urging anybody to go to Mars right now nor back to the moon. Don't want to go to any of those places when our people can't go to the grocery store. In other words, it's a matter of economy. Economy's got to be good, but we have to continue to work toward it and to plan toward it. And together, I think we can do that. I think this completes our business and concludes the first full committee organizational meeting. I have as guest my son and his future wife, my grandson and his future wife. I have George Schuler, who was with me when the two speakers before our present speaker. We were in McKinney, and that speaker said one day he didn't think it'd be this long, I'd be chairman of this committee. And this person, George Schuler, said, when you are, I'll be there. And he sits there in the row and have a place for him. Have John Jarvis also there that saved 4,700 jobs at the Red River facility there. Those are the kind of citizens I like to represent. With that, I thank all of you. We are adjourned.